I was just really sorry for the woman, and then I also heard that she had a family, she had children. So that's really tragic.
On the morning of August 5th, 2023, a thin ribbon of trail that threads through the woods of Harford County, Maryland, known to locals as the Ma and Pa Trail, held the ordinary rhythms of small-town life, a jogger tying her laces, a commuter passing in a car, the whisper of wind in the leaves. For Rachel Morin, a 37-year-old mother of 5 with an energetic laugh and a fierce devotion to her family, it was a place she'd run before, a place that felt safe. That morning, she went out for a run, as she often did. She never returned. When a person vanishes into a landscape that is meant to be familiar, the space they leave behind becomes a map of questions. Rachel's family quickly realized that something was wrong. Hours passed with no call, no return. The tight community that knew her, the neighbors, the friends, the school buses that carried her children, shifted from concern to alarm, and at dusk search parties began to organize. By the time her body was discovered the next day in a drainage culvert near the trail, the small town's sleep had been replaced by the hard, unsettled vigil of grief. What the investigators would find in the culvert would unravel a case that would span states, summon forensic science to the forefront, and ignite debates far beyond Harford County's borders. The physical facts of the scene were first and foremost to detectives: where she had been, how she had been taken, and what traces remained. Law enforcement described a brutal ambush, an attack executed with the kind of sudden violence that leaves little time for defense. Rachel had been forced into a culvert, out of sight from the trail. The physical evidence collected there, blood, disturbed vegetation, and other forensic markers, told a bleak story. Investigators worked carefully, methodically, making a meticulous record that would later prove decisive. For nearly 10 months after the discovery, the trail of the case crossed state lines. The investigation threaded together disparate elements: digital breadcrumbs from Rachel's phone and smartwatch, DNA recovered from the scene, and a pattern of violent offences that investigators said connected their case in Maryland to crimes in California, and even to a suspected murder in El Salvador. It was forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, and old-fashioned police work that eventually produced a name: Victor Martinez-Hernandez. Authorities said Martinez-Hernandez was an undocumented immigrant from El Salvador, and that his DNA tied him to Rachel's death. The manhunt closed in when investigators located and arrested him in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As the criminal charges were filed, first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree rape, third-degree sexual assault and kidnapping, the case became both personal and public. For Rachel's children and the family who loved her, it was an unbearable private loss. For a nation, it became a story that would be interpreted through many lenses: the horror of an individual crime, the role of forensic science in modern investigations, and the wider political debates about immigration and public safety. Court filings and press conferences laid the law at the centre of the narrative, while the courtroom itself would become the arena where facts, evidence, and competing narratives were tested before a jury. Courtroom drama often reads like a story, a sequence of moments that create climax and resolution. When Martinez-Hernandez's trial began, prosecutors painted a picture of premeditation and cruelty. They told jurors that he had ambushed Rachel, dragged her into the culvert, and committed acts that the law classifies as among the most heinous. They laid out the DNA evidence that tied the defendant to the scene and connected him to other violent acts, and they relied on a forensic timeline assembled from Rachel's devices, her phone and smartwatch, to show when she disappeared. Defense lawyers countered by challenging aspects of the evidence and argued for reasonable doubt. But after only a short deliberation, reportedly less than an hour, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. The swiftness of that decision reflected in the jurors' view the weight of the evidence the state had presented. A conviction, however, does not erase the human faces at the centre of the story. In the months leading up to sentencing, Rachel's family prepared to speak. Victim impact statements in court are private in their intimacy and terrible in their honesty. A mother's absence at soccer games and graduations, a hole where a laugh once lived, the quiet things that form a family's daily life. The judge, Yolanda Curtin, would later impose the maximum penalty: life in prison without the possibility of parole, additional life terms, and decades added on for the other counts. For the family, the sentence provided a legal conclusion, but not a cure. For the community, it was a formal acknowledgement of the cruelty of what had been done to one of their own. The case also raised questions that were political long before they were legal. Martinez-Hernandez's immigration status and history of being deported and re-entering the United States became part of the public conversation, used by some commentators and political figures as evidence to argue for stricter border and immigration controls. Others cautioned against reducing a complex criminal case and a family's loss to policy talking points. Law enforcement agencies, meanwhile, emphasized the cross-jurisdictional collaboration that solved the case. Maryland detectives working with California investigators where a home invasion had occurred, and with federal partners to trace DNA and move extradition processes forward. The investigation showcased how modern policing often requires a patchwork of databases, forensic techniques, and interstate cooperation to produce answers. To understand how investigators piece the case together, it helps to look at the quieter, technical moments. The labs where technicians compared DNA swabs, the analysts who reconstructed the timeline of Rachel's last movements, and the detectives who interviewed witnesses and pieced together fragments of memory. One crucial strand was genetic evidence recovered at the scene and compared against databases that eventually yielded a match to Martinez-Hernandez. Digital forensics also played its role. Data from Rachel's phone and wearable devices helped narrow down the time window of the attack and corroborated other physical evidence. In a sense, the case exemplified the modern forensic toolkit, where biology and bytes converge to write a narrative that a jury can read. The human cost of those technical accomplishments is profound. Rachel's 5 children, young people whose lives were irrevocably altered, sat through hearings, offered statements, and were forced to confront the public unraveling of their mother's last hours. During sentencing, their voices, raw and trembling, reminded the courtroom that the legal system's language of counts and penalties translates, in the end, into empty spaces at family dinners and late nights when homework goes unfinished, because a parent is not there to help. Community members gathered to offer support, and the Ma and Pa Trail itself became a place of memorial. Flowers, notes, and the permanent ache of a trail that would never be quite the same. In the public sphere, the case also became a touchstone for media coverage. Outlets large and small chronicled the arrest, the extradition, the trial, and the sentencing, each reporting the factual scaffolding, but also shaping the emotional topography. When stories mention a suspect's prior alleged crimes, criminal history, or immigration status, the reporting can take on a life beyond the courtroom, shaping public opinion and igniting heated debates. That dynamic underscored a journalistic responsibility to report rigorously about facts while resisting the temptation to let speculation or political framing eclipse the human details that matter most. Forensic evidence, notably DNA, was the spine of the prosecution's case. It linked Martinez-Hernandez to the crime scene and to other violent incidents, creating a chain of association that prosecutors argued demonstrated both motive and pattern. But DNA does not speak by itself. It must be interpreted in forensic context. Technicians and prosecutors presented that interpretation to the jury, situating genetic findings within the geography of the culvert, the timing derived from Rachel's devices, and the testimony of investigators. The jury's fast verdict suggested that the combination of physical, digital, and circumstantial evidence was compelling. Even as criminal justice concluded one chapter with a sentence, other repercussions continued to ripple. Lawmakers and advocates used the case to lobby for policy shifts. Federal agencies issued statements. Local officials expressed condolences and outlined steps to keep parks and trails safer. Meanwhile, conversations within the community centered on practical questions: how to maintain safety on quiet stretches of trail, how to ensure parks have enough lighting or patrols, and how to support families who have suffered similar losses. These are the less dramatic but enduring parts of a tragedy: how a community reshapes itself in the wake of violence. Through it all, Rachel's story remained at the heart, beyond headlines and hashtags. Those who knew her described a woman who loved fiercely, a mother who rose early to make sure her children were ready for school, a friend who volunteered and attended community events, someone whose sense of vitality threaded through ordinary days. In the retelling, the smallest details, her smile, the way she pushed a stroller, the routines she kept, became anchors against the overwhelming abstraction of crime statistics. Her family's grief, and their insistence on remembering her as more than a victim, demanded that the narrative hold space for the life she had lived, not only the manner of her death. If one lesson stands out from this case, it may be that modern investigations are often a mosaic of many small truths, assembling into a larger picture. No single piece, no DNA swab, no phone ping, no witness, was solely decisive. Rather, it was the accumulation of evidence, the patient labor of investigators, and the resolve of a grieving family that moved the case forward. And while the justice system provided a sentence commensurate with the crimes, the work of healing, both for Rachel's children and the community, will take years, perhaps generations. In the months and years after the verdict and sentencing, the Ma and Pa Trail remains a place where people walk and run, carrying with them a memory that has been marked into the landscape. Rachel's children grow older in a world that will always remember the day their mother did not come home. The legal system has rendered its judgment, the community has offered its condolences and support, and the broader conversation about how to prevent such tragedies, through policy, through community vigilance, through better social supports, continues. For anyone who listens to this story, the charge is not merely to be informed, but to be moved to action, to value safety, to support grieving families, and to demand systems that protect the vulnerable. This is Rachel Morin's story as it has been documented. A life taken, a family shattered, an investigation that crossed states and used the tools of modern forensics, and a judicial process that answered with a sentence intended to reflect the gravity of the crimes. The reminders are sobering, that ordinary mornings can become sites of tragedy, that the work of investigators can bring answers to anguished families, and that, in the end, the measure of justice is both legal and moral. When you walk a familiar trail, return a phone call, or check on a neighbor, you are participating in the quiet vigilance of community, the small acts that can make the ordinary safer for everyone. If this story moved you, help us keep telling stories that matter. Tap that like button if you believe Rachel deserves to be remembered. Share your thoughts below. Let's honor her with conversation, not silence. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive into real stories that shake the world.